People from small towns, where everybody knows everybody. What did someone do that was so embarrassing they had to move away? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. Our mayor lost $1.3 million to an internet scammer promising a Beyoncé-Justin Timberlake concert. It was so embarrassing Oh wait, no, they re-elected him. My bad. Story 2. I'm not even from a small town, but this girl in middle school told everyone she had a brain tumor and did fundraising for a surgery, but one of her best friends asked her parents about it, and they had no clue WTF she was talking about. This was early in the school year, and she didn't last until winter break before her family pulled her out of the district because the bullying was so bad. Story 3. I remember in the 1970s, there was a girl in our town who caught all sorts of flack for getting pregnant at 13. 13, if you can believe it. Why, that little tramp? And by her uncle, no less. That poor man, seduced by that terrible devil child, knew she was a bad seed from the moment. Yeah, you as sick to your stomach as I am yet? That's how the old lady mafia in our town characterized the incident. We never saw her again, but Uncle Pervert was a pillar of the community and was frequently seen around town for years afterwards. I hope his ultimate fate involved hammers somehow. Story 4. A girl a year ahead of me was removed from the home because she was being molested by her stepfather. At night, a few local guys erected a sign saying, "Child molester lives here." Family moved to the next province. The wife stayed with him and tried to spread the story to people that her daughter had seduced her husband by walking around provocatively in her nightie, and it wasn't his fault. Story 5. Guy got arrested for CSAM. Local PD always publicizes these with pictures of them searching the house, as well as the general area. Sheriff's office executed a search warrant in the 700 block of Pedo St. Part of the material he was uploading was from hidden cameras in his bathroom, so his own daughters were unknowing victims. Wife kicked him out and began pursuing divorce immediately, so while he was out on bail, he was staying in a hotel. People kept egging and vandalizing the house and leaving threats, not realizing they were actually terrorizing the victims instead of the pedo. Story 6. My fuck-up brother-in-law got a 15-year-old pregnant at age 23. Small town of 1,600 in western MN. My parents-in-law, lovely people who raised 2 great kids but had been exasperated by this black sheep from an early age, had already basically cut off support because he had become increasingly destructive. Several DUIs and serious accidents from driving blind drunk. They reported the pregnancy to the county attorney's office. He declined to press statutory rape charges after consulting with the girl's parents. The townspeople were pretty viscous to my in-laws, though. They lost a number of supposed friends, and they ended up selling their house and moving 17 miles out of town. My mill described it as the worst year of her life and said she was pretty suicidal at several points. Story 7. Dude in my high school class recorded himself jerking off and saying a certain girl's name over and over. Wouldn't have been a problem, I guess, if he hadn't recorded it over a VHS of RoboCop and then left that in his car when he took it in to get fixed, and if the guy fixing his car hadn't taken it home for his family to watch. Bit of a nasty surprise for all involved. Story 8. This is not embarrassing, but they were forced to move. Our old neighbor and my wife got into a petty argument about dog poop. To make a long story short, she tried to poison our dog with antifreeze and ended up killing the neighbor's dog on the other side. At the same time, she was cheating on her husband, and he let the police fully aware of what happened. We all packed that courthouse and made her feel horrible. The judge was furious. She moved away shortly after. Only enough the house exploded about a month later from a gas leak. No one was there. Story 9. A girl tricked a boy into sending her nudes by pretending to live on the other side of the country and being interested in him. She then proceeded to share these online, and it spread like wildfire. In not even 12 hours, everybody had seen them, and that was in 2003. The guy switched schools that week, but it didn't help, and the whole family moved away a few weeks after. Don't know if the girl got in trouble, but I doubt anything meaningful was done to her. Story 10. We had a girl in high school who went to stay with her sister. Yes, she was pregnant. Her dad was a very outspoken pastor at a local church. The story ripped through town. The horror. Well, she was never allowed to return to our town, but magically the pastor's wife, she must have been 50 at least, had a new baby she pushing in a pram all over town and claimed was hers. Everyone knew. Everyone whispered behind their backs. No one said a word. Pretty fucked up when I think about it now. Story 11. Late 80s. Very nerdy guy. Super quiet, bowl cut, smart but completely socially inept. Not a jerk, just a nerd. Summer his JR year, visits family for the summer, comes back, well, as a white guy acting like a black guy. I mean, fully dressed as a rapper and talking like one. He even changed his name, Duke E. Fresh. Duke E. became Dookie in 2 seconds. Dookie Fresh, rough. Went to another HS by deck, I think. Last I heard, he came out and was finally comfortable with who he is. No longer pretending to be black. Story 12. The minister died from autoerotic asphyxiation. His wife and kids came home from a long weekend, and he had been hanging for days in a hot room in women's underwear, surrounded by porn magazines. The family left immediately, but the wife only came back for the funeral, talked to almost no one. Within days, it was as if they never existed. Story 13. 3 teen sisters faked their own kidnapping. They said they had been tied up in a cornfield. They sketched each other up to make it look more realistic. They blamed the sheriff's son. They didn't know he was the sheriff's son. They had a warrant for their arrest after they didn't appear in court. Story 14. Art Lawal. This guy who lived in town and had even run for mayor got physically run out of his house with his wife, screaming and throwing magazines at him as he ran out. The whole neighborhood witnessed it. The wind caught the pages and scattered them all around. This was in the late 1980s. The magazines were pictures of chubby, hairy guys dressed in women's lingerie or nude but with makeup. I saw one myself. The guy had one of those big, oversized lollipops and some hair bows, and that was it. That was the first time I even knew that kink was a thing. I knew what gay and straight was, and I honestly thought that was it. I was brought up strictly religious, so just had never heard anything like that. He tried staying at a motel on the edge of town, but the local teenagers, and probably some adults, just wouldn't leave him alone. I heard he fell into alcoholism and died, but I don't really know. His wife moved away too, so I don't really know what actually happened. Story 15. Not embarrassing, but back in the early 80s, there were these 2 guys in my 40,000 pop town. One owned a top restaurant and the other the coolest bar. They both did and sold a lot of cocaine, but they were great folks and did plenty for the community. When the feds were snooping around, the local police chief gave them the heads up and suggested they move. So they packed up and headed to Florida. The restaurant guy and his family stayed there the rest of his life. The bar guy eventually moved back to town when his kid was in high school. Story 16. So I'm not from a small town, I'm from a city, but my parents sent me to school in a nearby small town, as the school was supposedly really good. Anyway, someone started a rumor when I was in year 8. I'm British, so I'm not sure what grade that would be for Americans, but I was 12 years old, that I went down on a guy in the school toilets. This rumor literally would not go away, and I ended up having to leave the school and go to one in the city as the bullying got so bad. Still haven't really gotten over the trauma, TBH. Story 17. This gal, Heidi Carnes, stole a bunch of money from a charity that was started to help underprivileged children. She was the secretary of it. The found she spent over $20,000 on Lululemon clothes, Starbucks, and other frivolous things. She made her husband and family move from Watford City over to Fargo because of a new job opportunity after she sat a couple weeks in prison. I know there's others that have done crap like this in WC, but that's the latest one. Story 18. Small town of 10K people in the 80s when absolutely nobody had any home security cameras. Like any town, there were thefts and break-ins. What people almost didn't figure out was that the things they thought they lost were actually stolen from them. After the fact, people learned that it was an all too common experience to suddenly find yourself missing a valuable piece of jewelry. No sign of break-in, but the diamond ring was just not where you were sure you left it. It was always the type of heirloom item that wasn't worn every day. It was just kept put away somewhere in a little bag or box. Most people suspected their friends, family members, children, or spouses, because who else would even know about the existence of this item? The local insurance agent where you took out a home insurance rider to cover the diamonds. This guy, call him Steven, would help you make sure that your family valuable was insured. Then a couple years later, when you made an appointment to stop in and review your life insurance policy, he would be late to the appointment. Once in a while, he got caught knocking on front doors at the appointment time or popping his head inside the unlocked door to see if you were at home. His cover story for that was, "Oh, I thought we agreed to meet at your house." But typically, while you were in his office, waiting for him to show up, he was in your house stealing from you. After his jail term, he moved away. Story 19. He didn't leave town, but he did move his kids from the local school and sent them to a big school in the next town, so he didn't have to see anyone who knew what he had done. Small town of 100-ish people. Darren kept breeding his dogs, who all looked the same. A few people in town got a pup off him, so everyone knew what they looked like. And being some weird mixed breed, it was easy to tell one of Darren's dogs from a normal dog. He came to our place randomly one day to tell my partner that he had shot his dogs because they kept breeding and were mother and son, and he was sick of having inbred pups. My partner isn't even this guy's friend. He just knows him from the pub, so why would he come to our house just to tell us that? We don't care about you or your dogs. He shrugged it off as Darren being the weirdo that he is. A few weeks later, 2 dogs were found alive 20 meters down a mine shaft deep in the bush around town. It was a huge deal with a specialized team going down the mine shaft to rescue them, and photos were posted on the local Facebook page and the news. Everyone knew instantly they were Darren's dogs, but that's weird because he told us he shot them months ago. Went down to the general store to get the gossip, and he had told the shopkeeper a few weeks ago that he'd given them away and told someone else he'd found them dead in his yard a few weeks ago. There wasn't much they could do without proof. He said they'd ran away the day before, and I guess just decided to commit dog suicide and jump into a deep as mine shaft. Anyway, word must have got back to him that he was going to end up down a mine shaft, and since that day, no one has seen him around. You, Darren. Story 20. Our mayor resigned and moved halfway across the country to be with a grown daughter no one knew she had. She'd been elected in June of 2020 in special elections with low turnout and quickly started doing shady stuff like trying to destroy blocks of our historic touristy downtown to build a new jail, including plotting to circumvent the Historic Preservation Committee. She was, to say the least, not well liked by much of the town. A few years later, 3 new council members got voted in, went to a 4th incumbent councilman and said they wouldn't vote for the current mayor to be mayor again. Our mayor is elected by council, not by popular vote, but they would vote for him. He happily voted for himself, and the 3 new members quickly cracked the majority that had been trying to implement a lot of stuff the town didn't want. The then mayor somehow found out she wasn't going to be appointed again by her peers and resigned a half hour before a council meeting with no notice to the council or city staff, and pretty much left town after that. Town politics have thankfully been pretty boring since then. Story 21. I grew up in a small town in Georgia. I had a friend in high school that came out as gay. He was essentially forced to leave town for his own safety. So many Christians were so ready to judge and harm someone for just existing. Thankfully, I left too when I graduated high school. I could never go back or let my kids grow up in a place like that. Story 22. Popular and rich football player moved to town junior year. Always a starter and had a lot of hype built up around him because of where he came from. Camps, etc. He wasn't good, but if anyone knows how politics work in small towns, you understand. Anyways, summer comes along. This kid is a class act douche entitled as giving him a compliment. The deputy mayor? Whatever. Guy is just under the mayor went on vacation, which he did often. So the 2 sons would throw parties, obviously. Fun parties, and the 2 sons were actually very cool. Always a mix of the cliches. No one knew about it really, but the 2 sons were getting into trouble when the parents came home from vacation. There were really high phone charges that correlated when they were out of town, and they were accused of nefarious something or other. Not many people will understand this time as it was the mid-90s. No cell phones, etc. Anyway, the 2 kids were stumped, and it was obvious that someone was calling 1-900 numbers, phone, whenever they threw a party. I have no idea how the parents kept leaving them alone after all this, but that's another story for another day. These brothers came in with a plan and hit all the phones, but one that was in their parents' bedroom, the 3rd party they threw that summer. I guess they had an idea who it was but weren't sure. These were rather large ragers in a big house, small town. Sure enough, about 1 o'clock, the music cuts off, and one of the brothers asked everyone to come upstairs to check something out. A few people got tipped off and had already went upstairs. Anyway, they opened the door to old Johnny, real name, laying down on the parents' bed, jacking it to someone on the phone, in front of pretty much anyone who squeezed into the hallway. The family moved before senior year started. Story 23. My parents' church, and that which I attended at the time before I realized that the congregation was comprised of mostly judgmental and generally horrible people that only pretended to welcome and accept me at all, was at the center of a town-wide Pop to 5,000 scandal when their pastor became the subject of an FBI investigation. One of the trustees who served as IT tech support back in the early days of the internet and when computers were still rather primitive, had let himself into the church building and into the pastor's office to fix something on the church's computer, from which the pastor conducted the majority of his work communications and the like. The trustee claimed that upon digging into the files, he had found material that made him immediately go to the nearest trash can to vomit. It was at that point that the relevant authorities were contacted and subsequently were in contact with the FBI, who promptly seized the church's computer and the pastor's personal computer while placing him under arrest. The pastor made the cover of the local newspaper and had the nerve to complain about the fact that they put him on blast. My family ran into him at a gas station a few months after his arrest, IDK. Why the hell he was out and not on an ankle monitor or something. The secretary at my parents' church had the audacity to call the local newspaper and complain to its editor that he shouldn't have been on the front page, picture and all, like that, and that he was really a good man with personal problems that needed attention. Notably not denying the allegations against him, nor that he was a grade A pervert. I'm so glad I don't live in that town anymore. Story 24. A photo got leaked and shared around a high school of a stage photo of some white kids doing the Nazi salute next to some black kids dressed up like slaves. Kids doing stuff, no excuse, but clearly none of them understood how deeply wrong it was. Anyway, parents found out, and it was a huge debate in the town about it and what should happen to all the kids involved. From what I understand, the kid who was the ringleader behind it had to move 2 states away because the family was so ashamed. None of the kids' names were used and their faces were blurred in the picture when the local news reported on it, but the town is so small that everyone knew right away who all the kids were and who their parents were. Story 25. This actually just happened over the last 3 weeks. I teach at a rural high school of 400 students in the middle of a tiny town. 3 weeks ago, toward the end of class, a boy got up to throw a drink bottle in the trash. As he was walking back to his seat, he stopped to fart directly onto a girl. He must have tried too hard or something because he shit his pants instead. The smell was bloody revolting. I sent him to the nurse, since her office has spare clothes and a small shower, and I took the rest of the students into the hall. I found out today that the boy has transferred to a district about 30 miles away. I don't know that the defecation incident was the cause, but it wouldn't surprise me. This kid still had 3 years of public school to go, and the students can be absolutely merciless about things like that. Story 26. My neighbors across the street invited me over for dinner. I was maybe 5 or 6 years old. They told me to stop hanging out with another neighbor girl that I was really close with. They told me that because she was Jewish, she was going to burn in the lake of fire, and said I would too unless I cut her off. I was a child and felt scared, so I told her I can't be seen hanging out with her, or else we will both burn in the lake of fire. Her parents called my parents, outraged. My parents asked me where I heard that kind of talk from, and so I told them it was the neighbors across the street. My parents then warned all of the other neighborhood parents about that family and what they're trying to brainwash other people's children with. The whole neighborhood ostracized them, so they moved away to Texas. After that, the girl I hung out with wasn't allowed to hang out with me anymore. I still feel horrible about it, and I resent those neighbors for tricking me, a 5 or 6-year-old, into intimidating my Jewish neighbors. I was just a kid. I guess that's way worse than just embarrassing, though. Story 27. An ex of mine grew up in small town near the Texas-Oklahoma border. His aunt was wild and beautiful. She was 17, became the other woman in an affair with the president of the town bank, who was more than twice her age. She eventually got pregnant and had an abortion. This all came out when the bank president and his wife split. The aunt was 18 at the time and was hustled off to college with some financial assistance from the bank president. She never moved back and rarely visited her mom, who continued to live there. That town was so backwards that the aunt still got looks in the grocery store 20 years later. Story 28. A girl from my small town, about 6,000, had to move away because apparently she masturbated with a hot dog and it got stuck inside of her. She had to go to the ER to get it out, and someone's mother working the night shift was the nurse, and she told someone. We were in grade 8-ish. The poor girl was teased relentlessly for years after. TBH, now as an adult, I'm not sure it really happened, but the damage was caused either way. Poor girl. Story 29. One guy embezzled a huge amount and felt he had to leave where we were. No clipping, sorry. Or Google Troy Thompson for a documented example. Small towns have an amazing capacity to protect their scum, who have family, etc. But crooks coming in, mental health patients or druggies, are met by police a few kilometers out of town and encouraged to turn back or move on, knowing the next town will also get a heads up. Only my experience as a rural resident who worked mental health. Story 30 didn't cause him to move, but one of the town cops had his dog in the car with one night, not a police dog. He got called down to the bar and thought he didn't need to turn it off, and anyway, it was cold out. Who would just jump in with a giant German Shepherd in the front seat? Dude, he went to the bar, juked him and ran for the cruiser, jumped in and took off on Joyride, and the state patrol got him 30-40 minutes from town. Story 31. Not a small town, but a fair-sized company. A senior manager, M, was carrying on an affair with a subordinate, F. They apparently enjoyed carrying this on in satellite facilities when they could. After one of these liaisons, the lady left a glowing review of their most recent coupling on his voicemail. Somehow this message was widely distributed among admin employees. She left employment shortly afterwards. Story 32. At the time, he was a police officer, well known and respected. He was physically abusive to his wife and children. His oldest moved away while we were in high school. She became a stripper and took every opportunity to come back to town and strip. To embarrass him, he eventually faded into the background when his abusive behavior that drove his daughter to seek revenge was discovered. So this is a bit off topic. She did move away, but it was her dad who was embarrassed. On a side note, we met for coffee one day when she was in town. She related a story about dropping her suitcase at a large train station. It opened and her clothes fell out. An elderly came over to help her. He picked up a G-string, turned bright red, mumbled something and left. She felt very bad for him. Story 33. Was coming back from a kick-ass rock concert, King Giz, with my good buddy. Drove back to our hometown. I was sober. He was very much not. We decided to roll down to a local beach we both knew to smoke a joint before bed. Post-legalization and walking distance from our residences. It was 4 a.m. We got caught in the act by a local cop who goes by the name Omitted Bologna. Legit. He's very well known in the town, and that's his real name. I knew this. Anyway, my buddy, who was fucked up and high beyond belief, could not, for the life of him, fathom being stopped on a beach by one Officer Bologna. He had not heard of the policeman, despite growing up with me for 10+ years. Thought he was having a vision. Anyway, imagine a completely zonked, cheese to the tits stoner meeting a police officer named Bologna and assuming that the universe was playing a joke on him. Wasn't good. My buddy went as far as to call the situation piggy to the officer's face. I'm amazed I didn't get booked that night. Story 34. Believe me, in some small towns, no amount of embarrassing shit can make people move away. We had premarital pregnancies, cases of extreme alcohol-induced shenanigans, awkward, unsuccessful robberies, and cheating scandals. People still live there, and embarrassing stuff is just occasionally mentioned like, Ivan? You mean the guy that tried to pee into a holy water bowl in the church while drunk? Yeah, I visited him yesterday, and we had beers. There was only one person that was forced to leave town, but not because of something embarrassing, but because he was a goddamn menace, a child arsonist that have a brain defect that prevents him from feeling pain. Story 35. This tea spilled is good. The police chief was from the biggest redneck hillbilly family in the county, going back pre-Civil War Oregon Trail times, related to all the judges and cops. Good old boy number one. He was stealing firearms from the evidence locker and smuggling them across the state lines into Idaho and Oregon for quick cash. Reason? He was a closet homo. He was screwing behind his family's back and was sneaking cash away so he could elope and abandon his family. Per usual, the locals swept it under the rug, and it was left unspoken. He got to keep his retirement and pension, moved out of town, and everyone pretended it never happened. Story 36. A woman in our street was in the middle of a divorce and had a hard time handling it all, so she started drinking. When they had a bad fight, she would drink a lot, go outside to walk her dog, and key every single car she walked past. For 2 years, no one had any idea who it was until she finally got caught on someone's security camera. In small-town fashion, the entire town was watching from across the street as the police went to her house. She moved within weeks. Story 37. The girl I took to prom ended up trying to help her brother kill his ex. Nobody would have never guessed they would do something like that. Their family was always super friendly and well-known in town. They attended church regularly and participated in almost all school events. After that, they stuck it out for about 1 year while the court cases took place before the parents quietly moved away. Not that anyone judged them, but the self-embarrassment had to be too much. Story 38. I had to move back to a small town where I was related to a large amount of people by either birth or marriage. I was at the store when an old woman walked up to me, called me by my mother's name, and asked how my kids were. It was my mother's cousin's wife. I was in a coffee shop when I got into discussion with the owner. He was my cousin's first husband. He knew I was family because of my chin. I was divorced, moved there for family support, but realized that if I was ever going to find a partner, I'd have to do a thorough interrogation of any dating prospects. I moved. Side stories. My cousin lived in a city 100 miles away, was out dancing, met a really cute guy. Things were getting kind of hot. Good thing they started talking. He was another cousin. My uncle was a diesel mechanic and worked on tour buses. He had to go up to Alaska for a job. Met a waitress. Things clicked. Making out in the car out back. They started talking. Yep, another cousin. My eventual partner came from out of state. But I still had to ask because he lived in the same city as some of my other cousins. No relation, thank my lucky stars. Story 39. When I was a kid, the 3 business owners went to Vegas from our small farm town in Nebraska. They all ended up getting divorced that year. 2 of them sold their businesses and houses and left town. I delivered the newspaper to one of them, although, of course, I never talked to him about any of that dubious affair. And the third supposedly mortgaged his house and business to a local bank, but stayed. The rumor was they played high-stakes poker and tried to cover for each other as things went downhill until they had all gambled everything they could get the title to. Completely separate, maybe 10 years later, the guy who owned the tire store rode out to Vegas with his wife on his motorcycle, and when they came home, they were driving a new Porsche. He is a nice guy. It was a long time ago now, but I remember his silver Porsche, as he always drove it to the tire store when he was working. Story 40, I went to high school with a girl in SW, Ontario, who ended up going on the Maury show. She was bullied a bit before she went on the show, but was bullied mercilessly after the show. She went on for an episode about kids being shitheads to their parents, and she bragged about kicking her mom down the stairs in their house. One kid in our school taped it off their VCR, long time ago, okay, LOL, and passed it around for the whole school to see. She came back to school thinking everyone would think she was badass and shit. They moved away almost immediately. Like one day she was there, the next they were gone. I wonder what happened to her. It's been years since I thought about that story. Story 41. I've told this story a few times on other posts, but to summarize, kid in school gets cancer, easily beats it within a year or 2. He enjoys the pity party, though, and keeps shaving his head bald so people would know who he is. He's really weird, but people, girls, teachers, officers alike, all are nice to him because cancer, duh. Fast forward to his senior year, he's 18, and in a group chat with a bunch of freshman girls ranging from 13-15. I never quite understood the context, but I guess he was trying to group sex them. Anyways, he sends them a really disturbing video. Crouched in front of a bathtub with a hard-on. Proceeds to take a nasty shit on the floor, then finishes on top of it. Yes, unfortunately, I saw the video because it was spread around the school before the next day. I don't think he got into major trouble either. Taken down to the police station and talked to. Never saw him at school again. He legally wasn't supposed to have any internet access or interaction with minors. I looked him up a few years ago and saw that he has a new Facebook account in the state over. Story 42. This was more sad than embarrassing. A teacher at my high school went ballistic and shot his wife, attempted to shoot his 2 sons, and then himself. His daughter was in my PE class, and she had been at a friend's house that night. The boys ran to get help from a neighbor. And somehow, everyone at school knew what happened the next day. So to keep us from talking about it, the principal came into each class to tell us the facts and ask us to be respectful about it. The girl and her brothers never came back, and they moved to another state to live with relatives. Story 43. Not my town, but nearby. A man said he and his wife and 5 kids, the youngest was an infant, were moving to another country. Only he never got on the plane with them. Instead, he moved to another state with his pregnant girlfriend. Meanwhile, the wife and kids are stranded in a new country with no money and no way home. Story 44, small town in rural southern Appalachia, 2009-ish, 8th grade. A girl in my class sent pics of her pleasuring herself with a broom handle. The pics apparently made their way to someone on the football team, and from there spread like wildfire to the rest of the small school. She very quickly gained the nickname Broomstick and was ruthlessly bullied. She moved schools to the one in the next town over, despite living right across the road from our school. Story 45, kids I went to school with. We would be threatened with being failed and held back a grade, but the one loud kid who didn't care announced they kept passing him and grades didn't actually matter. In 5th grade going into 6th, they made him repeat a grade. Nobody knew he failed until he just wasn't around anymore. He lived right down the street and I never saw a moving truck or anything. The second guy to be held back that same year did care and started to cry. He was one of those guys the students left alone. He'd claim he had a Cherokee spirit that followed him around and would talk with him, and he was obsessed with squirrels. We were all content just to give him some space and let it out. Soon as the teacher saw him crying, she started yelling at him, "What do you expect to happen when you don't hand in any homework all year?" Kind of stuff. Intended to shame. I saw the first guy in the newspaper many years later, death by overdose. Second guy I saw a few years later at a trade school. He seemed happy to see me, but I never saw him there again. Story 46. The minister's wife, the Methodist minister, their parsonage was in my neighborhood, got pregnant by their teenage foster son. At first she brought the baby home and told everyone it was a friend's baby, but everyone knew, including the neighborhood children. Then she moved away with the baby, and then the whole family moved. At some point, a divorce happened, and the minister left the church. It's unclear whether that was voluntary. I swear this actually happened. It was deeply traumatic for their other 5 children. Story 47, embarrassing, I'm not sure, but population 600. Transfer student killed another student in a hunting accident in 5th grade, and then killed 3 girls in a drunk driving accident junior year, and then joined the military. No charges. Another girl had her boyfriend kill her brother over $10 in a bag of weed. So I guess she didn't leave. She just went to prison. The local pastor got caught sexting minor boys on Grindr, and his wife left him, so he left. No charges. A transfer student in high school got hit by a teacher, but since everyone loved the teacher so much, they defended him, which led to a huge news cycle. Student left after they let the teacher retire. 2 students found having in the singular tanning bed available in town. Both left. Long-standing local mom opened a cafe, which was clearly a child labor scheme, and she priced items based on whether she liked you or not. Ended up closing down. Teenage couple blew up a meth lab. Don't know where they went. Young closeted gay man clearly dealing with Christian repression was seen destroying all his belongings in his front yard with a sledgehammer before he fled to Missouri. My cousin caught in a huge cattle rustling scheme. Prison. One woman embezzled $300,000 from a local trade school, and she ended up leaving even after everyone said, I feel sorry for her. School counselor arrested on a DUI and left but came back as a school counselor. One girl got jaw surgery and insisted that she was going to steal everyone's man, but she ended up staying ugly and horrible. She left after her house burned down on her birthday. A teacher's daughter got caught having in the teacher's lounge 3 times. She went to a boarding school. And then, obviously, a ton of women marrying the absolute worst men imaginable, which was embarrassing in a way, and they have been fleeing since the Great Divorce began in about 2018. Story 48. Not my hometown, but one nearby. Mayor ran a print and copy shop. People really liked him. He wore wacky ties to official events, would always give discounts to church and school prints. He was doing a big print job for the local community college, stayed late and worked hard, had a big pile of packages to deliver in the morning. His wife decided to help him out by going in early and picking up all the packages, delivering them to the community college. She grabbed one too many packages, the one containing her husband's pictures of himself at parties. He was apparently making copies to distribute to his partners in this group. Needless to say, his career as mayor was over. His wife divorced him, his business spiraled, he became a severe alcoholic. Then he moved to Portland and became a minor burlesque performer, opened a boutique adult store, and specialized in making high-quality prints of people's tasteful poses. Story 49. Dude I went to school with. Decent guy back then, mostly lost contact after high school. I knew he started drinking quite a bit, but other than that, I didn't really know much. Fast forward a few years, and he started to be seen with girls way too young in his car. People who knew them told me he was dating girls 15, 18 years old. He was in his mid-20s. The age of consent here is 15, so this is legal, but not considered acceptable by most people. Then about 3 years ago, he was arrested for assault and rape after his previous 16-year-old girlfriend had broken up with him. He ended up in jail for 18 months. Way too short, and when he got out, he got beaten up within days. Ended up changing his last name and leaving town. Another consequence of all this was the poor guy who bought his car without knowing the story. Ended up getting trashed within a few weeks. Story 50. My mom used to tell the story of when she was growing up in the early 1930s in rural Kentucky, that the town had a plague of chickens dying here and there, mysteriously, and had been going on for a few months one summer, and people didn't know why it was happening. Then one night, a determined farmer had set out all week hoping to catch what was happening when he spied a young boy sneaking into the hen house. Turns out he caught him in the act of molesting the chicken, which of course killed it. It was a local 13-year-old boy shagging the chickens and killing them in the process. She said within a few days the boy was shipped off to relatives, as the whole town knew, and that the family ended up moving away within a year, as they were basically shunned for raising such a deviant. Story 51. A woman that was treasurer of the elementary school PTA embezzled thousands of dollars over several years, around $30K, from the schools of her own 3 kids. This is a small town of less than 6,000 people. Us fellow parents were furious because even those of us that aren't official members of the PTA will join in on the fundraising efforts and donate time and money so our kids can benefit from new playground equipment and field trips. I feel so sorry for her kids. Not only did their mom go to jail, but her name and face was plastered all over social media and the local papers, news channels, and it had to be embarrassing for them because I'm sure that many classmates would have heard about it. Their dad divorced the mom, sold off the house, and moved to another town. So hopefully the kids got a fresh start. Story 52. We were 12, 13, and there was a youth hangout every weekend at one of the churches in town. It was from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m., and you would go play foosball, Guitar Hero, buy pop and hot chocolate, etc., etc. It was an absolute blast. So kids ages 10, 17 would all hang out. Well, a lot of the time, kids would just hang outside and wander around town after grouping up. One night, my friends and I grouped up, but one girl was missing. We were all worried and were texting her. Imagine the first generation of flip phones. What a time. And finally, someone runs down the street and screams, "OMG, Jay is giving Dee a blowjob behind the church." And everyone freaked out because like, what? We don't give blowjobs. We're just kids. This is wild. Anyways, it wasn't very long before her family moved away. I don't think it was because of that incident specifically, but it did have an eerie correlation. So maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but I will never forget that moment. Story 53. In the 1970s, my mother's best friend got divorced. It was recommended that she not be friends with her anymore by someone from the Baptist church. My mother refused, said that was stupid, and my parents were promptly kicked out of the Elks Lodge, and my dad asked to resign from the junior college. There were probably other reasons. My dad was friends with people of color, and they listened Ray Charles and Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass instead of country and gospel music. They tried to stick it out. Dad worked for a cabinet maker's shop for a while, and Mom opened a gift shop outside of town. We eventually moved to Florida, where no one cares what you do. Literally, we moved because my parents were too liberal in the Bible Belt. Story 54. I was in 4th grade in a SW Chicago suburb in public elementary school. In like November, a new girl showed up and was named Kansas. This girl was large, at least 175, 200 lbs, and was somehow almost perfectly round from the waist up. Well, we had those desks that had the built-in seat that then the desktop opened so we could store our books, as we did not have lockers yet. Poor Kansas could not fit in her desk. She couldn't fit in the slightly larger one either. So they had the janitor come and try to move the seat back a bit while still being attached, and he did to the best of his ability. Kansas sat down, actually looked like she was going to fit, and then the bolt holding the seat in place snapped, and she fell backwards as if in slow motion. Now being in a room of 10-year-olds, we all burst out laughing as Kansas rolled on the ground and tried to get up. She had to be helped up by the gym teacher, who then took her to the office, and she was never seen again. I still think back on that day and feel terrible at how I acted and laughed and cannot imagine how she remembers it. Story 55. The meteorologist on our local news was beloved by the community. Her husband co-hosted a public access TV fishing show. He then exposed himself at a college women's volleyball game. It was hushed up until a local paper ran an article about it. They both immediately quit their jobs and moved their family out of state. There was a lot of local backlash against that paper for having published the story, and to this day, some locals still boycott that paper almost 30 years later. Story 56. Used to know this kid in the elementary school. He was always kind of a douche, but his family was relatively new to the town, potentially the province as well. He had left my school before we moved on to high school, and I was shocked I hadn't seen him, since all kids from the surrounding schools go to the same high school. Asked around, turns out his mother, who was a dog sitter for a living, had left like 4 or 5 dogs in her van, windows closed, on the hottest day of that summer whilst going to the grocery store. Bunch of them died, and they got shunned out of the town. Sorry for the poor storytelling. Also you, Hunter. Little prick. Story 57. In my town, which is a small college town, there are a handful of small businesses which both drive the economy and serve as community pillars. Each of them is owned by a son-in-law to a well-respected chiropractor in town. One of those businesses is a progressive Christian church which is pretty central to the local community. This church has a head pastor, a youth leader, and several sub-pastors, I guess you could call it. They're fellow pastors, but not the main pastor. They may occasionally give the sermon. I don't know the details because I don't go to church. Another business is a restaurant, which happened to employ a woman who was the daughter of one of these sub-pastors for several years. She was a server, and her husband was the manager. The owner was the son-in-law of the town's respected chiropractor, who may also have been one of the alternate pastors. Her husband, the manager, was in the military, but since working up in the restaurant, was going to let his contract run out and tried to make managing the restaurant his focus. He hated the military. Anyway, it's discovered that the woman and her husband, restaurant server and manager, had been stealing cash from the restaurant for a long time, to the tune of like $70,000. Owner, whose father-in-law is one of the church pastors, has a sit-down with the server, her husband, the manager, and the server's father, also one of the church pastors. He tells them he's aware of the theft and that he won't press charges if they pay it back and resign immediately. Server and manager couldn't pay that much back, so her father paid it back. They resigned their positions and the husband had to stay in the military. They eventually moved to California for his job, but I suspect the embarrassment was a motivating factor as well.